There are way too many books to know where to start. There are all those books you had to read in school. And maybe you loved them. Maybe you didn't even read them. And everyone says you should read the classics, but where do you start? This one? But what about this book? Or these? Yeah, this is a pretty good book, but it is one of the best ones. Here are the top 10 books that I think every young adult should read. First up is Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. At a time where you're discovering who you are, finding your identity, and dealing with how the world sees you, I think this is the perfect book for that mentality. Ultimately, it's about how to deal with yourself and be comfortable in your own skin. This is a book that tackles the discovery of identity and how to find acceptance or even joy within that process, no matter what the quirks are. Next up, Frankenstein. On one side of it, there's a similar idea concerning identity, but this time it's more tackling the irony that if you're ashamed to even start and to try things that you've never done, you're never going to improve. It's the shame of not knowing which will forever keep you from not knowing, and that's something which needs to be tackled. But on the other side of it, there's this idea about knowledge and being in an area of your life which has been partitioned for the seeking of knowledge. Frankenstein recommends it, but also warns against it. Be careful about your ambition and how far that you're willing to go. And more to the point, be careful about the consequences of your action. It deals with the idea of a Napoleon complex and the thoughts that our pursuit is worthy. And so no matter the consequences, it's all worth it because of how worthy and noble our cause are. But we should be a bit more careful with that. Next up, with a similar theme to responsibility from Frankenstein, is Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. This is my favourite Shakespeare play. I say that a lot pretty much every time it comes up. And the reason for that ties into this idea of responsibility, or more appropriately in Julius Caesar's case, of duty. The interesting point about this play is that Brutus is the protagonist. It's not Mark Antony, it's not Julius Caesar, it's Brutus. And yet he's the one who commits the crime. The reason I think this book is so good is because it raises questions, not necessarily giving answers, but it raises questions about duty. Do you serve your friends or do you serve your principles? Who knows? But this is a book that can help you think through that. Next book is John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. And I think that this continues the vein of friendship that we had from Julius Caesar, but it's more talking about the importance of having people around us. It shows the essential nature of having social connection and, more importantly, of listening. Don't underestimate the importance that you can have in someone's life just by listening, by being there, paying attention, and that's it. I think it's a beautiful message. Next up is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. It's about not wasting your life. It's about things that we should really be evaluating, the impact that we could have on people, like Of Mice and Men, versus the material. Save a few lumps of coal and let the person who ultimately we rely on to freeze, to starve and not be able to feed his family. Is that the life that we really want to lead? The earlier that you can decide in terms of what you really value in life, whatever that might be, it might not be people, it might be the money, and that's fine, as long as that's what you truly believe in. A further meditation on values is Protagoras and Meno by Plato. I think Plato can be quite difficult to read, but I found that this was one of the most successful ones. And ultimately what it contains is, what does it mean to be good? What is actually good? What are the values that constitute it? And how do we share it? How do we teach it and spread those values? I'm of a similar opinion as to what I said for Christmas Carol, that the earlier the better. And that's not to say that these won't change and evolve, but to start thinking about what kind of values do I want to hold? And how do I want to see the world? And how do I want the world to see me? Because that's the two sides that are discussed in these Socratic dialogues. On the one hand, it's what kind of generosity will I show to the world? In terms of how do you interpret and react to the world? And then the second aspect of being good is the values that you embody. And how do you act and how do you conduct yourself for the interpretation of other people? I don't think it's got all the answers. I don't necessarily agree with everything that's in the book, but it's another book which is important to get these ideas going and to start thinking about fundamentally what is important to you, because this will shape who surrounds you, this will shape your pursuits in life, and it might be one of the most important things you can do. Next is Notes from the Underground by Dostoevsky. I had to put Dostoevsky in there. He's a phenomenal writer. It can be very funny at times, and I think some of his best and most witty writing perhaps is within Notes from the Underground. The character of the narrator is one that you don't find in too many books, especially the outlandish and bold claims that he makes. This really is the warning that goes alongside A Christmas Carol and Protagoras and Meno. The warning of what can happen if you don't decide who you want to be. If you allow life to push you along, you don't develop values or principles. Ultimately, what happens is you develop resentment. You develop nihilism. And the outlook that you have on the world is, at least in Notes from the Underground at times, despicable. You are subterranean. You are underground, looking up at the world above you, desperate to enter there, but every time that you do, you push people away. You see the narrator flip between at times being sensitive and vulnerable, and at others being tyrannical and oppressive, seeking only to hurt others, get a little taste of power, just that little bit so he can feel like he's above someone else. And it's tragic. It's sad to see that someone can fall into this position. And you have to ask yourself why. Why do they give up any consideration about their appearance, the place that they live, how they conduct themselves? What are the roots of it? I think there are a couple of factors for this. In part, the lack of identity and the lack of reflection on who he wants to be. I think secondary to that is this idea of power and seeing the world only through the lens of power, which to me personally is a classic bully mentality. The idea that I've been tyrannized, someone's exerted their power over me, so now I need to go out and exert power over someone else. I'm not a fan of transactional action and viewing the world through that lens. I think this obsession with power and that dynamic is one of the surest paths to unhappiness. The narrator has a lot of self-awareness. He recognizes these things about himself. He's very conscious of his failings, of his faults. But what good is self-awareness if it doesn't follow with action? You can be as self-aware as you like. You can list all your faults and all your flaws, and yeah, great, but what are you going to do about it if you don't do anything about it? To be honest, maybe that self-awareness makes it worse. Next up is The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. Hemingway is another writer that I think everyone should read. In some ways, The Old Man and the Sea can be seen as an antidote or a tonic to Notes from the Underground and the character within there, because this conversely takes the hardship of life and the beatings that life can dish out, and how should we respond to that? It's a parable about not giving up, no matter how hard it seems. Even if it looks like you're going to go back and you've got nothing, keep up your spirits. Keep going. Don't give up. When we give up, that's the only time that we lose. If we can keep going, if we can keep living and finding purpose and meaning in what we do, then we can never be beaten. And I think it's a hopeful message, because there will be rough times. There are always rough times ahead. And maybe we haven't faced them yet, but they will come. And it's about how we deal with them. I think The Old Man and the Sea is a book that can prime people for that experience. And it's ironic, considering Hemingway's life, that this was the mentality that he espoused. But perhaps in this case, it's important to separate the work from the author. And maybe more of a case of do as I say, not as I do. The next Hemingway book is A Farewell to Arms. And this is the book which maybe gives a little more insight into Hemingway's life. There's a lot of alcohol. The main character, Fred, drinks all sorts. I'm not saying that he's an alcoholic in the book, but he's certainly a little bit liquorish. That's besides the point, really, in terms of why I think that this is a great book, particularly for young adults. And it comes down to two reasons. One is the love story and the discussions about that. And the other is about understanding, and more importantly, about misunderstandings. And these can be as trivial as between people speaking a non-native language and the misunderstandings that can arise there. A very funny scene with a barber and the main character deriving from misunderstanding. And there are a few others that take place throughout the book. But there's one line in this book which I think was the one that had the biggest impression of me, and perhaps has shaped the way that I try and conduct myself in relation to the world and in relation to others. And that is, let's not misunderstand each other on purpose. And it's a line said by the love interest of the main character. And I think it is such a profound line, and one that only Hemingway could write. He doesn't always get them. He doesn't always nail it, but with his style of prose and writing, he just sometimes hits with the most simple, but also at the same time, the most profound writing. Because so many of us, we're looking to get angry. We're looking for the fight. And for some reason, we just don't want things to be going okay. We're looking to misread a situation with the people we love, with our friends, with our family, with something we read online. We're looking for that affective reaction, and it's toxic. It doesn't do any good for us physiologically. It's maybe not the way that we want to be going, and yet we do. And that is one of the most important lessons that I think can be taken away from this book. Not to misunderstand on purpose, to be generous with our interpretations, to give the benefit of the doubt, not to the point of naivety and where people can take advantage of us, or we can be totally complicit with terrible things that are going on in the world. But there needs to be a side of generosity and an instinct towards generosity. Now on the other side, there's a love, and it's a beautiful romance that Hemingway writes. It's kind of an insight into the ridiculous and the little things in a relationship that to outsiders make no sense. They're looked upon with derision, with mockery, but to those inside of it, it's beautiful. And there's some of the most cherished and special moments. A beautiful introduction to first love and the silliness and the infatuation and affection that can come through that. And not just in the first love, but in all future ones. And I think it's important that we all get that reminder, whether we're young adults or not, of how love can be and the role that we play in maintaining and sparking it. And finally, yes, we do have Le Petit Prince, or The Little Prince, by Antoine de Saint-Exupery. I mean, it's one of my favourite books as well. It's one that I've probably reread the most times, partly to practice French, but also because it's just a fantastic story. It's just got so many beautiful moments in it, and lessons that can be taken away from it. It's got a similar message to A Christmas Carol in the sense of valuing what is truly important in life. But it goes beyond that in terms of how do we see the world? Do we just see the world in terms of numbers? Or do we have a more aesthetic appreciation of the world and the beauty that it can hold? The Little Prince is a lesson that is what we should be pursuing. And if you're going to pay attention to anyone, and anyone's advice from all the books that I've listed today, it's got to be the fox. He doesn't say much, but what he does say are some of the best lines in the book, in literature and perhaps anywhere. They are really words to live our lives by, and the core of finding happiness. To lead a life that isn't based on one-upping the next person, but think about the connections that we have with other people. Think about what is really important. I think it's a lesson that anybody needs, and The Little Prince is one of the best places to get that. So yeah, those are my top 10 books that I think every young adult should read. To be honest, top 10 books that anyone should read. Let me know what your favourite books are. Let me know if you've got any thoughts about the books that I mentioned today, and I'll see you in the next one.